Welcome back to Pulse of the Planet, bringing you the latest news from around the world. On September 14, 2025, a sense of anticipation and uncertainty gripped Washington, D.C. The city, always a stage for history, felt especially tense as dawn broke over its iconic monuments. People from all walks of life, politicians, business leaders, journalists, and everyday citizens, gathered near the Supreme Court, aware that the decision about to be handed down would reverberate far beyond the Capitol. The Supreme Court was preparing to rule on a policy that had defined and divided America's economy for years. The air was thick with speculation, as the nation waited to see whether the justices would uphold or dismantle the controversial tariffs that had shaped trade, jobs, and household budgets. These tariffs, first enacted under former President Trump, had sparked fierce debate. Supporters argued they protected American manufacturing and jobs, especially in the heartland, while critics claimed they raised prices and strained relationships with key trading partners. The policy had become a symbol of a broader struggle over globalization, national identity, and economic security. Across the country, the stakes were deeply personal. Factory workers in the Midwest wondered if their jobs would survive another shift in policy. Importers on the coast braced for changes that could affect their businesses overnight. Families everywhere, from small towns to big cities, waited anxiously, knowing the verdict could impact everything from the cost of groceries to the stability of their savings. When the Supreme Court finally announced its decision, the response was immediate and electric. In a landmark 6-3 ruling, the justices struck down the global tariff policy, declaring it unconstitutional for the executive branch to impose such sweeping trade measures without explicit congressional approval. The court ordered an immediate end to tariff collection and set in motion the complex process of unwinding years of trade disputes. Customs officers at ports and borders received urgent instructions, while businesses scrambled to adjust to the new reality. The decision sent shockwaves through global markets, as trading partners recalibrated their expectations for U.S. policy. But this ruling was about more than economics. It was a constitutional reset, a powerful reassertion of Congress's authority over trade, and a reminder of the checks and balances at the heart of American democracy. The era of unilateral trade wars declared by the executive was over, replaced by a renewed commitment to legislative oversight. The decision marked the end of a turbulent chapter in U.S. economic history. For the first time in years, the power to shape trade policy was firmly back in the hands of the people's representatives, not a single office. For many Americans, this felt like a return to stability and predictability in governance. Business leaders hoped for clearer rules and fewer surprises. Ordinary citizens looked forward to a future where economic policy would be debated openly, not decided behind closed doors. The implications were vast and immediate, from the price of cars and electronics to the future of international alliances. The effects of the ruling would ripple through every sector of the economy. Allies and rivals alike watched closely, recalculating their strategies in response to America's new approach. The Supreme Court had not only ended a policy, but redrawn the boundaries of presidential power, setting a precedent that would shape the balance between the branches of government for years to come. As the sun set over Washington, America stood at the threshold of a new economic era, one defined by restored balance, renewed debate, and the enduring promise of democracy. The Supreme Court's decision was about more than tariffs. It was about who controls America's trade policy. The Constitution gives Congress, not the President, the power to regulate foreign commerce. The Trump administration had used emergency powers to bypass Congress, arguing trade imbalances were a national emergency. Critics warned this set a dangerous precedent, allowing any president to declare emergencies for sweeping policy changes. The case became a test of checks and balances, forcing the court to clarify the limits of executive authority. The ruling drew a clear line. Major economic decisions require congressional approval. The legal fight against the tariffs was spearheaded by a coalition of businesses and industry groups who found themselves struggling to survive under the weight of rising costs and severely disrupted supply chains. For many small business owners, the tariffs meant not just higher prices for materials, but also uncertainty about the future of their livelihoods. Factory workers faced layoffs as production slowed, and entire communities felt the ripple effects of the economic turmoil. The sense of urgency was palpable, as these groups banded together to challenge what they saw as an overreach of executive power. Their central argument was that the president had overstepped the authority granted under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, using it in ways Congress never intended. Protesters gathered outside courthouses, holding signs and demanding accountability, while legal teams worked tirelessly to build their case. The lower courts, wary of intervening in matters of national policy, hesitated to issue a decisive ruling. But after months of legal wrangling, a federal appeals court ultimately determined that the president had indeed exceeded the limits of his powers, setting a major legal precedent. The government, unwilling to accept defeat, quickly appealed the decision. Recognizing the case's significance, the Supreme Court agreed to hear it on an expedited schedule, drawing national attention and intense media coverage. Both sides prepared for what was shaping up to be a historic constitutional showdown. Legal experts, journalists, and the public alike watched closely, knowing the outcome could reshape the boundaries of presidential power. The administration argued that in a rapidly changing global economy, the president needed broad discretion to act swiftly in the name of economic security. They warned that limiting executive authority could leave the nation vulnerable to unforeseen threats. On the other side, the challengers insisted that only Congress had the constitutional authority to make such sweeping decisions about trade and tariffs. They argued that unchecked executive power threatened the very foundation of American democracy. As the Supreme Court prepared to hear arguments, the nation waited. The stage was set for a landmark ruling, one that would define the balance of power between Congress and the president for decades to come and shape the future of American governance. The Supreme Court's majority opinion, written by Chief Justice Roberts, invoked the major questions doctrine. The court ruled that sweeping economic actions require clear congressional authorization, not vague emergency powers. The justices found the IEEPA was meant for true crises, not long-term trade policy. Allowing the president to use it for tariffs would erase Congress's constitutional role. The ruling reaffirmed that regulating trade and imposing taxes are legislative functions. The dissent warned the decision could limit future presidents' flexibility in economic crises. The majority insisted that checks and balances must endure, even in uncertain times. The decision became a defining lesson in the limits of executive power. The tariff debate split the nation, exposing deep divisions not just in politics but in communities, families, and workplaces across America. It became a flashpoint for larger questions about the country's economic future and its role in the world. Supporters of tariffs saw them as a crucial lifeline for American workers, especially in industries battered by decades of foreign competition. They believed tariffs could level the playing field and protect jobs from what they saw as unfair trade practices, particularly from China. In places like Granite City, Illinois, supporters pointed to the reopening of steel mills and the return of good-paying jobs as proof that tariffs could revive struggling communities and restore pride in American manufacturing. For these Americans, the higher prices on everyday goods were a sacrifice worth making if it meant bringing back factories, supporting local economies, and giving families a sense of security and hope for the future. But opponents, including many manufacturers and farmers, felt the pain of higher costs for raw materials and the sting of retaliatory tariffs from other countries. For them, tariffs threatened their livelihoods and made it harder to compete both at home and abroad. Many small businesses struggled to absorb the extra costs, often passing them on to consumers or, in some cases, losing customers altogether. Some were even forced to close their doors, unable to keep up with the changing economic landscape. Critics argued that tariffs acted as a hidden tax on American families, raising prices on everything from groceries to cars, and ultimately hurting the nation's global competitiveness. They worried that America was isolating itself from the world economy. Instead, they favored working closely with allies and international institutions to address unfair trade practices, believing that cooperation and negotiation would yield better results than unilateral trade wars. Ultimately, the debate was about more than just economics. It was about values, identity, and America's place in a rapidly changing world. It forced the nation to confront what kind of future it wanted to build. The Supreme Court's ruling forced a national reckoning, challenging leaders and citizens alike to find a new balance between protecting American interests and embracing the opportunities and challenges of an interconnected global economy. The end of tariffs means lower prices for consumers and relief for businesses reliant on imports. Companies can now plan, invest, and hire with more certainty. However, Industries once shielded by tariffs, like steel and aluminum, face renewed global competition and uncertainty. Some communities may see job losses as protective barriers fall. The ruling also opens the door for businesses to seek refunds on billions paid in tariffs, creating new legal and financial challenges for the government. The process will be complex and drawn out. For most Americans, the immediate impact will be felt in their wallets. The long-term effects will reshape the economic landscape. The Supreme Court's decision sent ripples across the globe. Allies welcomed the end of unilateral tariffs, seeing a return to stable, rules-based trade. Financial markets responded with optimism as uncertainty faded. The ruling could revive institutions like the World Trade Organization and restore U.S. credibility. Rebuilding trust with partners, especially after years of strained relations, will be crucial. The U.S. can now work with allies to address shared challenges, particularly with China. Trade tensions remain, but the tools and approach have changed. The decision doesn't solve every problem, but it resets the diplomatic stage. America's future in global trade will depend on cooperation, not confrontation. The Supreme Court's ruling shifts trade power back to Congress. Lawmakers must now take responsibility for trade policy, ending years of executive freelancing. Future tariffs or major trade changes will require congressional debate and approval. This slows decisions but increases transparency and accountability. Congress may reform old laws to clarify presidential powers and define emergencies. The ruling reaffirms checks and balances at the heart of American democracy. Major economic choices will now be made through debate and legislation, not executive order. The era of trade volatility closes, replaced by a demand for consensus. America's economic future will be shaped by cooperation between its branches of government.